Hello, let's talk about nose piercings. Noses are one of those that absolutely terrified me when I first started piercing. It is one of the most common piercings I do though, so I've gotten a lot of practice at it. It was really scary though, because how does jewelry go in when there's a lot going on in this tiny space? Also, it's the middle of the face, so doesn't it kind of hurt? Despite popular belief, I don't want to hurt people. So let's talk about it. First of all, noses are a little bit tricky. A lot of people before coming in to get a piercing will watch videos of people getting piercings. And it's really difficult to gauge how painful a nose piercing is by watching somebody. Noses tend to be the piercings that I get the most reactions out of my clients from, but they are also usually some of the lowest rating on any kind of pain scale. This is because there's just a lot of weird little nerves that activate parts of the face in the nose. And the entire time that I've been piercing, there's been exactly 2 people who have not teared up at getting their nose pierced. A lot of people flinch. The majority of people will start tearing up, at least in the eye that's on the same side as the piercing, if not both eyes. A lot of people will also scrunch up their nose, and they don't really mean to. There's just a lot of natural reactions that comes along with messing with a person's nose. But generally, the pain isn't that bad. The exact placement of a nose piercing really kind of depends on your aesthetic. I personally have never done a high nostril, although I know that those are usually a little bit more complicated for healing, and those usually hurt a bit more than a standard lower nose piercing. And there's been a lot of debate over the years about if a nose piercing should go in the ridge or directly outside of the ridge, if it should hang low, if it should hang high. And truly, it depends on your nose shape and what you want your nose to look like. Noses are a piercing that I always take a little bit of extra time with my client to make sure that they like where I mark it, because it's really kind of subjective. There's not really a whole lot happening in the nose that we need to be super concerned about, and they're not particularly prone to rejection or migration in the way that a lot of anatomy-dependent piercings are. And because of this, pretty much anybody can get a nose piercing. I personally don't pierce under the age of roughly 13 to 14. I'm not super strict about the exact age, largely because I do want to make sure that my client is at least partway, if not mostly, through puberty, through most of their growth spurts. For 2 reasons. One, just like the ears, the nose can change a lot as you grow. But also I find that small noses tend to be a little bit less comfortable with nose jewelry, which dives us into the discussion of nose jewelry. Hoops are a very popular option, however, I personally do not pierce with a hoop. I find that hoops generally cause more complications than necessary when it comes to healing. It can stretch your piercing out, and it's also more likely to cause what's called a cheese wire effect. Because nose hoops specifically tend to sit around 18 to 20 gauge, they are a thinner jewelry. And because it is a hoop and because it does pull on the piercing, over time it can start to actually cut through and migrate out of the nose. This is usually not as big of an issue when you're dealing with a fully healed piercing. However, when it is fresh and is still kind of coming into its shape, this can cause some issues, and it's not unheard of. Noses are interesting in the fact that there are several different styles of jewelry that are made specifically to go into the nose. There are nose bones, which is another jewelry that I don't recommend. Some places do offer nose piercings by gun, and a nose bone, or at least a variation of a nose bone, is usually what is used on those cases. A nose bone is basically a straight stud that has a bulbous end. And the way that it works is you shove that bulbous end into the piercing, and that sits inside the nostril and holds the barbell in place. There are no parts that go on or come off of this jewelry, which makes it really easy if you're using a piercing gun, because then you don't have to go into the nose at all. You just pierce it and it's in there. The issue with these is, first of all, it's very common for these to fall out. Usually the bulbous backing is not that large, and it can just sort of boop right out of the nose. And even if it doesn't, to change these can cause a lot of damage, especially if your piercing is not fully healed, because you are effectively shoving a 14 to 16 gauge object through an 18 to 20 gauge hole. It's going to hurt. It could very well set you back in your healing time. Not something I would recommend. I'll also say I had a client who had a nose bone in, but she didn't have it all the way in. And so it looked like it was sitting perfectly in her nose, but then I went to take it out to switch her jewelry for her, and we found that her piercing had closed completely on the inside because the nose bone was only sitting halfway through the piercing. Not jewelry I would recommend. There are also L's or L curves. I personally have a beef with these just because anytime I put one in, it has fallen out. There's really not a lot to hold it in, and so I don't like it personally, but some people have great luck with these. I personally pierce with what's called a nose screw. These are a little bit tricky if you're completely new to having your nose pierced. It takes a little bit of practice to be able to put them in and take them out. But I find that these stay in pretty effectively. Once you're practiced, they are really easy to put in and take out, and generally they heal really well. Flatbacks, often called labret studs, are also becoming more and more popular. I am personally on the fence about these just because they are a little bit more difficult to keep clean on the inside of the nose. And for some people, these can be a little bit trickier to change, because in order to use a flatback, you have to put the jewelry in from the inside of the nose rather than the outside. However, I will say if you are getting pierced with a flatback, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. They are a great jewelry. So let's talk about how noses get pierced, because that was something that I was really not sure about how it's done. The most common way that I've seen nose piercings done is by piercing from the outside of the nose into the nostril. This usually works out because there is a mark on the outside of the nose, and then you just sort of push it right on in. Some people choose to do this without any tools. They just sort of use their fingers to support the nostril wall to keep it from collapsing into the septum. Some people choose to use clamps. I personally don't prefer this method because the clamps take up a lot of space within the nostril, and also it causes a fair amount of unnecessary pain. I personally like to use the receiving tube method, which is basically just a little metal tube that sits on the inside of the nostril and catches the needle. Still, there are others that I've seen that have done a freehand method, piercing from the inside of the nostril to the outside. I can't really give any information on this method other than to say it looks kind of awkward because you're folding the nostril up slightly. This method is most common for people who are piercing with flatbacks, although a lot of piercers will choose to use a taper instead of piercing from the inside out. So the most important part of any new piercing is the healing and the aftercare. This is a piercing that is best kept clean with a saline solution, ideally a sterile, sprayable saline solution that you can just spray on the inside and the outside. However, my shop does not sell sterile saline solution, so the second best option would be to use a non-iodized sea salt with some distilled water, keeping that salt concentration really low, just enough to have those antibacterial effects without drying out the skin. Usually I find that with nose piercings, the inside is really just the issue of collecting boogers on the jewelry, and the outside is usually where you get the typical crusties that you see on most piercings. This is obviously not true for everyone, but it's what I've noticed personally on my own piercings, and also any piercings that I've worked with other clients on getting changed or helping them clean. Nose piercings are going through cartilage, and because they are going through cartilage, it can take a decent amount of time for them to heal. Generally, if you're lucky, you'll be fully healed after about 6 months, but it can take upwards of a year to fully heal. Generally, it's recommended that you wait until the piercing is fully healed to change the jewelry. However, I usually tell my clients, give it a minimum of 2 months. And I always give the caveat of if you go to change it and it hurts, wait a little bit longer because you are not ready. One of the things that I love about nose piercings is it's one that you can do without having to commit. By that I mean, if you do eventually choose to retire this piercing, you no longer want to wear nose jewelry, you can take it out, and yes, there will be a scar, and if you know where to look and what to look for, you'll notice it. But generally, most people won't notice that you have a nose piercing scar. Noses are fun in that the pores on the nose tend to be the most visible of anywhere on the face. And so a nose piercing scar will just sort of look like another pore on your face. I will also say that if you do choose to retire your nose piercing, make sure that it is truly what you want to do. Noses have a tendency to close pretty quickly after the jewelry has been removed. So if you take it out and then decide a week later that you want it back in, there's a good chance that you might not be able to get the jewelry back in. Some people are lucky and are able to save their piercing. Many people are not. If you have had a nose piercing and you had it in for a while and you took it out for a short period of time, there's a good chance that you can go back to a piercer and ask them to run a taper through it to reopen the hole. A lot of times piercings will just shrink over time and the hole will still be there. And so running a taper through it can help to reopen that hole. This is not a fix for everybody, but it is a good first step if you want to reclaim a piercing and are hoping to avoid going under the needle again. In any case, if you have a nose piercing and you have questions, or if you are thinking about getting a nose piercing, the best option is always to talk to your local piercer. The information that I provided in this video is very general, and it's based on my understanding of the industry today. And the thing about piercing is things are always changing and we're always learning new things. But also to physically go into a piercing studio and talk to a piercer. They will be able to talk to you about what your best options are based on your situation and your face and your goals. In any case, if you found this video helpful at all, I would appreciate it if you gave me a big ol' thumbs up. And also, while you're down there, leave me a comment about what you would like me to talk about in a future video. Also, while you're down there, be sure to hit that subscribe button because I post a new piercing video every Friday. And also, whatever it is I'm doing on Wednesdays, it's a whatever Wednesday. And I hope that you have a lovely day, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye!